I think it's a mistake to say your burnout comes from your work. I would say your burnout comes from a combination of the things that are draining you.
Welcome back. This week, we are with Jonathan Hoover. We are going to learn all about how to protect ourselves from burnout if we're burned out, how to heal, how to recover, how to manage our stress in a healthy way. This is such an important topic in our health series because so much of our health has to do with how we are doing, how we're managing stress. Are we on the verge of burnout? Are we just emotionally overwhelmed? Are we weary? These are the things that we need to talk about. We're going to get strategies. We're going to get tools. We're going to have some light bulb moments. And even though the topic's a little bit heavy, we're going to have a lot of fun. Now, without further ado, my new friend, Jonathan. Jonathan, first up, why do you think so many Christians don't pay any attention to emotional health? What's going on? You are the expert that can talk about this.
Wow. I hope it's not quite true that we don't pay attention to our emotional health, but I think sometimes as Christians, one of the things that we struggle with is we pay attention to our faith at the expense of our emotional health. And I think there's a wonderful, benevolent, thing underneath that. Hey, I want to serve God, and I want God, and it's sort of like God's going to take care of my emotions. I just have to do all the things. I'm going to do all the things, and God's going to take care of my emotions. Well, there's a sense in which, the Scripture tells us that God's peace is there for both our logic and our heart, right? And God's peace will guard your hearts and minds. And so that's true. But on the other hand, there is a scriptural principle of taking care of oneself emotionally that is all the way through Scripture. And we see multiple, think about Martha, right? Martha's a wonderful example of somebody who was doing the things at the expense of self-care.
Yeah.
Taking care of all the things that needed to be done for this big dinner with Jesus and his entourage. And, Lazarus is there, and Mary is there. And she gets so upset because Mary's listening to Jesus talk and not helping with all the arrangements. It's understandable, right? Dinner for 15 at least.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me. But the thing about it is, what's interesting is Jesus says your emotional health is probably not right where it needs to be right now. He said, you're worried and distracted. The word worried there means to be pulled apart into pieces mentally. I'm just coming apart mentally because so many things are pulling on me. And that idea of distracted is I'm upset. I'm geared up on the inside. I'm almost like life is moving too fast for me. Life is moving too fast for me to process. I do think it's really easy to think that I'm doing what God wants me to do by doing all the things, and emotion should take a backseat. And here's why I think that happens. I think we have this weird impression that to take care of ourselves emotionally would be selfish. And there is a big difference between self-absorption and self-awareness. Big difference. So I'll give you an example. My wife and I went on a cruise some years ago. The thing that the captain walks on, what is that called? The bridge. The captain's walking back and forth on the bridge, and it was glass, so you could see them all the time, right? And the captain's got these binoculars looking out at the ocean the whole time, constantly looking out at the ocean, right? That's a good thing. That is ocean awareness. We want the captain to be ocean aware. That helps us know that we're going to be safe. Now, on the other hand, if I were to spot the captain outside the boat in the ocean screaming for help because he's drowning, that is ocean absorbed, and that's not a particularly good thing, right?
Yeah.
So to be aware of my emotional health is a good thing, and it's something that God calls us to do, right? So that is having that binocular and being aware of my patterns, being aware of my habits, being aware of my stress load. That is not selfish. But if I get so absorbed in self that I can't see anything beyond my own wants and desires, yes, that is a problem. But I think so often we're convinced that if I was to pay attention to my stress load, well, then I would be letting God and my family down because that would be selfish. I'm just not sure that that's actually true. In fact, I think we give the best version of ourselves to God and to our family when we are managing our stress load and taking care of ourselves.
Amen to that. I'll tell you, for me, God kind of gave me this word years ago professionally of where he wanted me to go and kind of to position, if I could put it in a business term, positioning myself in the market. So I'm a business coach. I'm a believer. I have my podcast. I write my books, but I'm really passionate about having conversations that grow faith and grow our emotional health, because you may be able to recite the entire New Testament by heart, But if you're dealing with some stuff, you can still accidentally hurt people. And it takes away from our ability to go spread the gospel when we have some stuff that we got to deal with.
Yes.
So I think that having these conversations and bringing everything together and having you wrote stress fracture, and it's so good to come from a pastor's perspective, but you're also a psychology professor, to blend everything together to help people go, hey, can we call it a spiritual practice to deal with our stuff? Yes. Right? Talk about that just a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Speaking of thinking of it as a spiritual practice, look at Elijah. By the way, Elijah is the prototypical. I mean, it could not be clearer that Elijah was going through a burnout crisis, right?
Oh, yeah.
Look at the academic literature. We say burnout is comprised of three things. I say we. Dr. Maslach says, and she's the one that we all kind of trust: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, feelings of failure. So emotional exhaustion is I just don't have anything left to give you. Depersonalization is I'm withdrawing from who I am as a person because the demands of life are too much. And then feelings of failure come from a combination of unreasonable shame. See, I've never been successful. That's not true. But also because I'm depersonalizing, there are some things that are not probably quite as good as they used to be. And so that also sort of piles on. Look at what Elijah says to God. He says, I've had enough. That's emotional exhaustion. I don't have anything left to give you. And then he says, take my life, right? That is an ultimate depersonalization, moving away from his own life. And by the way, Elijah's a person who's used to getting what he prayed for. I don't think this is spiritual melodrama. I think when Elijah said, take my life, I think that's what he really meant, right? And then that idea of feelings of failure, you see that all through his speech. I haven't made a difference. I haven't been successful, right? But look at what happens. So you would think the first thing God would do would be to come in and address the cognitive problem. Your thinking is messed up, but it's not. The first thing that God does is make him sleep, make him eat, and make him take a really long walk, right? So this is curated by an angel. An angel is taking care of this process, making food for Elijah. I mean, that had to be some good stuff, right? The angel's making food for Elijah, made him eat more than once, right? And so if you think about this, there is a spiritual element to taking care of myself physically, emotionally, and spiritually, which, by the way, one of the things I hope your listeners will take away from this is we do have an enemy that wants us to be fatalistic with our stress. When we get to that really, really dark moment and we're like, I haven't been successful, it's not true, but we think that I haven't been successful. I haven't made a difference. And Elijah says to God, hey, take me out. I always thought, okay, so God says, go meet me on the mountain. All right. So Elijah goes and meets him on the mountain. And, you have this tornado, and then there's an earthquake and a firestorm, right? And when I was in Bible college, they gave me this incredible symbolism. Oh, here's what the symbolism of the tornado is, and here's what the symbolism of the earthquake. I don't believe any of that. Here's what I think. I think when Elijah prayed for death and God said, meet me on the mountain, I figure Elijah's thinking, well, this is where it's going to happen. Right? I'm going to go up in the mountain. This is where God's going to kill me. And then a tornado happens and he's like, all right, I'm going to die in this tornado. But he didn't. And then I'm going to die in this firestorm. Or I didn't. I think God was trying to help Elijah understand, if I really was done with you, I have all kinds of ways I could make that happen, right? You're here because you have a purpose, right? And then notice he puts Elijah back to work. He says, all right, it's time to get back on the job. You're going to have to do it differently than you did before. Now you're going to have a partner. You're going to have somebody who's going to help you. So to me, one of the things that's part of a spiritual discipline in this is asking myself, what is the truth? Is the truth that I'm really done? If I was really done, I would be done, but I'm not done, right? Is the truth that I've really been a failure? How would I know, right? That's why God told Elijah, there's 7,000 people you don't even know about that your ministry has influenced, right? And so part of the spiritual part of this is accepting the fact that God sees the value in me that I struggle to see when I'm so stressed out. That God sees my potential even when I feel completely empty, on the side of the road, got nothing left to give anybody. And that just because I'm hitting that wall doesn't mean that God doesn't have an even bigger season for me coming up than what my last season was.
It's so good. Now, I always hear about burnout just in the context of work. I have been burnout in my life. It had nothing to do with my work. Talk about burnout. What's a correct way for us to think about it in lieu of our spiritual health, emotional health, all of it? And is it just work related?
No, it's not just work related. Although you still, even in academia, and I'm very active in burnout research currently, we still see that. And sometimes we still sort of bow to that, okay, this is where burnout happens and we'll do research in that area. But it's not true. If you were to draw out a formula, it is strain times time. So it is strain over time. So you talked before about the difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Acute stress is just strain. It's not time, but it's such a huge strain that it blows my circuits. Burnout's different in that it is a repetitive stress, a cyclical stress, and I'm dealing with it constantly. An example I love to use is, Allie, if I were to bring you a 5-pound weight, it feels like nothing, right? I bring you a 5-pound weight and ask you to hold it with your arm straight out, outstretched, right? And just keep holding it. And I ask you after about 5 seconds, hey, how does that feel? You're going to go, fine, right? But I make you hold it for an hour, you're going to be in pain, right? Longer, you're going to start sweating. You're eventually going to drop that weight because it's just too much, right? That's what we're talking about. So it's not that caring for that elderly parent is too much. It is that day after day after day after day, without the right kind of rest, without the right kind of social support, without the right kind of regimen of taking care of yourself, there happens to be a moment where it was just that much too much. Like it just went over the border of too much. Yep. It can happen in marriage. We have a whole new science of marital burnout. It can happen.
Wait a minute. Okay. I want you to go and talk about that, because I was just coaching a client today in a business coach way. She has a therapist. She said her therapist said, I think you're burnout. She was, well, I guess I'm burnout with my company. And I said, I don't think your work is burning you out. I said, I think you're burnout because she has some health challenges and she's had some marriage challenges. I said, I think you're feeling burnout because of life. Yep. Don't put this necessarily on work. Your work brings you success and fulfillment. And like you said, in burnout culture, however people talk about it, it's only associated with work. So talk about marital burnout.
Marital burnout happens because there is this ongoing tension in the relationship that translates as stress. It can be a tension related to something that you have no control over. Maybe one of you has a health issue or something like that's going on. Or it can just be from somebody who, my first, 14 years in ministry, I was working with distressed married couples. It could be conflict in the relationship. It could be a lack of ability to communicate. It could be past issues. If you're in a blended family and you have a remarriage situation, it could be nothing to do with that marriage. It could be the ex-spouse is being vindictive and that's creating, challenges or whatever. Again, stress over time. It is that combination of over and over. And so I think it's a mistake to say your burnout comes from your work. I would say your burnout comes from a combination of the things that are draining you. If you were to sit down and take a piece of paper and write a line down the middle and say, all right, here are the, actually, this is an exercise I do with people, so I should just own that. When I work with people who are dealing with burnout, one of the things I do is I have them take a piece of paper, I have them write a line down the middle. On the left side, I have them write, these are the top 5 draining things in my life right now. On the right, I have them put, these are the top 5 energizing things in my life right now. But I'm very careful to explain to them what I mean by energizing. This is something that when you do it, you unplug from stress. You don't think about the other things that are on top of you. And you feel that battery recharging. When you do this, you just are in the zone, you feel it. And when you leave that activity, you're like, I'm ready to take on the challenges of life again, right? And what happens when I work with burned out pastors, especially, is those top 5 draining things, that takes no time at all. They can write those for me in a second. But the energizing things is a problem. And often I can only get up to 2, right? Often two is max. And so if you think about it, this is just physics. If what is holding you up is less strong than what is pushing you down, you're going to have a collapse. That's just going to happen, right? And so what happens is we have less things that are energizing, but it's not just work that's pushing us down. It is work, it is family, it is health, it is, and by the way, how I take care of myself, right? It's not just whether I have cancer. It's, am I getting exercise? Am I eating right? Am I getting good sleep? Because if I'm not doing those things, each of those becomes its own stressor and it puts an exponent on whatever the other stressors are that I'm dealing with. It gets that much worse. So I'm with you. I think burnout happens because of an accumulation of other things. Marital burnout, though, is particularly difficult because let's go back through those 3 stages and think about this. Emotional exhaustion means I don't have anything to give you, right? How many times have I sat across from a couple in my office where one of them says, I desperately want to be in love with you, but I don't have it anymore. I got nothing. I have nothing to give you, right? And then depersonalization, withdrawing, right? So the things I used to engage in with you, I don't really want to engage with anymore. And I'm doing so many things on my own. It is a sort of, think about the idea of marriage, right? The two become one team. It's not a two-headed monster. When the Bible says two become one, it's not two individuals become one individual. It's two individuals becoming one team. It's a three-legged race, right? But the issue is where I would have once walked right alongside you and we would have done things together. Now I'm doing things on my own and you're really not invited because I'm sort of pulling away from myself. And then feelings of failure, you begin to really doubt the marriage, right? Is this even the right thing for me? Right? Am I with the right person? Should I have never gotten married? Did we get married too fast? All those questions. And so the truth is, I used to wonder, okay, how frequently does marital burnout happen? Now that I understand it better, I start wondering, man, a large percentage of the people I used to work with probably were dealing with this and I didn't even realize it, that the stress of life had just made marriage very, very difficult. And if we could have dealt with the stress, it might have made repairing the marriage a lot more straightforward.
Yeah. You mean stress globally from all parts of their life, or
Sure.
stress because it all adds up. It's the 5-pound weight here and the 5-pound weight here and the 5-pound weight from there. In my mind, I just considered burnout emotional exhaustion. So I didn't realize that emotional exhaustion is just the first phase of burnout. Because when I talk to women about burnout, emotional exhaustion is the one thing that I hear in general. If someone's listening right now going, I'm not sure if I'm burnout, I'm not sure if I'm just exhausted, I'm not sure if I'm feeling a little depressed, how would we get clarity around that?
Well, the official answer is if you feel like I'm not doing well, the best thing you can do is make 3 appointments for yourself, right? I mean, this is the answer I give everybody, and I will stand by it unless somebody proves to me that it's wrong. This is my answer. If I'm not feeling right, I think it's burnout, maybe I'm worried, am I depressed? That, there could be a lot of things going on. I make an appointment with my doctor. I need to go see my physician, right? And let them hear what I'm going through. Let them hear my symptoms. And people say, well, my doctor's not interested in my emotional life. You'd be surprised. Because they intertwine with your physical life. So it does matter, right? Make an appointment with a counselor. Even if you've never met with a counselor before, I know for some people, it feels a little awkward, to sit across from somebody and talk about this experience. But trust me, working with somebody who's been trained specifically to hear your experience, to empathize with what you're going through, help you find some productive steps forward, it's huge. And then finally, make an appointment with a spiritual advisor that you trust. That could be someone, that could be your small group leader at church, could be your pastor, but somebody that you trust, right? So that you're sort of working those 3 areas: physical, emotional, spiritual. But the other thing I would say is this. I would say it's important to trust that feeling that something isn't quite right. One of the things that I run into when I work with people who have been through a profound season of burnout, like my dad's, I would say my dad's was so far, I would call it a nervous breakdown. We don't use that term much anymore, but it actually was a pretty functional term. It's a breakdown certainly is the functional part of that term.
And just for context, your dad, senior pastor of the church,
yes,
pillar of strength, and all of a sudden breakdown.
Yes, I forgot that we hadn't reviewed that. He went through just a terrible time of physical and emotional breakdown, even though he had been, at the time, 20, 25 years and pastored this amazing church that had explosive growth and was, incredibly emotionally strong individual. And then suddenly he hits this wall. And one of the things that I find in people who go through something very much like that is I'll say, did you have the feeling earlier that something wasn't quite right? And they'll tell me, well, I kind of did, but I thought I'll just push through it. It's going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. Right. And there's also this sort of sense that it won't happen to me. When you hear about other people going through a profound season of burnout, having a breakdown, getting depressed, those sorts of things, it's very easy for those of us who consider ourselves to be very stable to go, well, that wouldn't happen to me. And so it can cause us to doubt that little voice inside of us that says, something isn't quite right under the hood. There's something here that needs to be looked at. And so I would say trust that voice, right? My friend and colleague, Dr. Fernando Garzon, who I love, he's associate dean at Regent with me. He always says, if you're asking yourself, I wonder if I should go to counseling, then the answer is you probably should go to counseling. Yeah. If you find yourself asking the question, then you probably should.
That's great. My season of burnout was the end of 2020, beginning of 21, as I'm sure so many people hit burnout in that era of just chronic stress over and over again for so many different reasons. And I had prayed at one point, Lord, what do you want me to do? And he said, get help. It was just as clear as day. And I went, oh, I need to get my butt back in therapy. So after working with my therapist for a little while, I didn't realize I was burnout. I just felt numb. So I was still able, to be a cheerful wife and mom and run my company. And I was able to do those things, but I just felt a little dead inside. And so after working with my therapist for a few months, I was coming out of it, I said, how close do you think I was to burnout back then? And she said, oh, way past burnout.
Way past burnout. Yeah.
Because we are often still functional, especially for women. We know, well, I have to hold it together because I'm holding everything together. And if I fall apart, everything falls apart. So we will look operational on the outside, but we can kind of go numb and feel dead inside, right?
Yeah. Well, and in my book, I call that limp mode because in my early 20s, for whatever reason, I thought I wanted to be an automotive mechanic, even though I had no mechanic experience. Anyhow, that's a whole other story. But when I was a mechanic, I was focused mostly on engine management systems, which are the computers that run your car. What happens is, at least back then, before we got into as many electric cars, which those are interesting. I have so much interest in that. But I was always on those internal combustion cars. And the computer is making sure that you have the perfect mixture of air, fuel, and spark. And all these decisions that the computer is making is based off of smart decisions, right? Smart decisions. We want efficiency, make it efficient. But what happens is if the car computer realizes there's a problem through the sensors, okay, something's not right, right? Often it will toggle into what we call limp mode. And at that point, the algorithm that runs the car shifts from smart decisions to survival. It's just going to do whatever needs to happen in order to keep the wheels rolling and keep you going down the road. And so when I was a mechanic and then eventually service manager, what I experienced with people is they would drive their car until the engine was in bad shape, even though they had warning a long time ago, right? It was in limp mode, check engine light was on, stuff was happening, right? They knew it wasn't performing the way the car had always performed before. There was a big difference, but the wheels were still rolling and they were still getting to work and they were still getting where they needed to go, right? And so it was like, why would I take my car to the mechanic? Sure, the light's on, but it's fine. But the problem is, as a result of that, not only did they have terrible fuel economy, but they eventually just broke that engine because they just kept trying to run it. And I think that's what happens for us is we know something isn't normal. We know something isn't right. And that warning light is kind of on in the dash of our mind. And yet we seem to still be able to go to work every day and do the things that we do. There's a chart in my book. We call it the person chart. And we ask you to score on a scale of 1 to 10 how you're doing in all of these areas: physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, occupationally, and then navigationally, which has to do with, am I going in life in the direction that I want to go to? And do I feel empowered to go in the direction that I need to? And one of the things that I found from years of using this chart is the O often is the last one to drop. So I'll get that chart. Physically, I'm a 4, relationally, I'm a 3, marriage is in trouble, right? Occupationally, I'm a 9, right? I'm doing great at work, and that is limp mode on paper for you. That basically what's happening is I'm losing in these other areas of my life, but at work, I can keep it going. I can keep it going. But what people don't understand is eventually that 9 in the occupational thing is going to drop 2. Like, it's never a long-term solution to orient all of your resources towards survival, right? And that's like what you said, going to see a therapist, getting some help, trying to figure out, how do I get my life back, is such a huge question when that happens.
And I think for so many people also, if they go through a period of prolonged stress and then things get a little better, then all of a sudden they feel like, why am I going into burnout now? Things haven't been terrible for 6 months or for a year, however long. But I'm guessing that you're going to agree with what I'm saying. We'll see. When life settles down, sometimes our body lets us feel the feelings that it wasn't safe for us to feel at a time. Can you talk about that?
You nailed it. That's exactly what happens, right? We are firing off all of this adrenaline during the worst of the storm, and there is a sense in which you get through the storm and you sit down and you realize what you made it through, and it washes over you and the adrenaline isn't firing anymore. And suddenly the weight of what you just carried hits you, right? And when it hits you, it's very difficult then to just shake it off, right? It's very difficult to just snap out of it. And so what people don't understand is we want to be so linear with this. All right, I made it through 4 years of stress at this really stressful job, and then I got out of that job, and now I'm doing a different job, and everybody around me thinks I should be 100% happy. Everything should be wonderful. And I can try to gin that up and be like, okay, that's who I am right now. Mm-hmm. But the problem is those 4 years of working at that very difficult job, right? They will hit me in a way after it's over, in a way that they didn't hit me when I was going through it. Yep. Because now I have some time to process it. Often the brain will store things to process later. Okay, I'm going through this really difficult time, but we're not processing, we're doing. But there will come a time when the doing is over and the processing starts. And that's when a lot of times we really hit that wall. And people are so upset with themselves. Why am I stressed out now? If I was going to have a breakdown, why didn't I have it back then when I was going through this? That is what you said, Allie, is exactly it. It's that it's finally hit you. That's the answer. Why am I dealing with it now? Okay, it didn't hit you before, but it hit you now. It's not. And here's the other thing. It can cause people to second guess good choices they made. Let's use my example of the bad job for 4 years. You just started a new job, right? And this new job is good, but you're having this stress crisis all of a sudden because of the 4 years you just went through. It can cause you to second guess. Maybe I made a bad choice. I took this new job. Maybe this is a bad choice because look at how I'm doing. So you have to really be careful. And this is where you need the help of your loved ones. You need the help of your counselor. You need the help of wise people in your life who can speak into this to help you know, all right, how am I going to navigate this season where the feelings are coming back? You used the word numbness before. Numbness is a protective mechanism, right? That our brain tries to protect us from intense pain by reducing the feels in general. So all my feels are reduced, right? So I don't feel as happy as I used to, yep. But at least I'm not feeling as terribly sad as this circumstance might make me feel, yeah. Right? But what will eventually happen is that volume knob on the emotions will go back to normal. And I'll have some moments where I'm like, I haven't felt this good in a little while. Like I'm going to have some days where I'm like, I feel wonderful. This is fantastic. But I'm also going to have some days where I'm like, ooh, there was some pain stored up there. And I'm feeling it in a way that I didn't even feel it back when it was happening.
So good. And I feel like there's someone listening right now who's just having the biggest light bulb moment about this. Speaking of light bulb moments for you as a researcher, as you're researching this book, what's some of the burnout research that surprised you most?
Oh, that's a good question. And I worked on the book for so long. If I try to just sort of think through the whole process, I think the physical ailments that can come from burnout shocked me. At one point during my research for the book, I just wanted to do a survey of what are the things that happen to people physically that we know are related to burnout. And I expected, of course, cardiovascular issues. That I expected. I'd read enough to know that reduced immunity, our immune system gets reduced. I'd read that. But when I actually started compiling a list, I was blown away. And I thought, you know, in a nation where we have a health crisis on so many fronts, I wonder if we're really paying enough attention to stress and how it impacts our health. Because there are so many things, all the way from digestive issues, unexplained weight loss, unexplained weight gain, muscle tension, right? This is huge, right? That muscle tension for ladies, lower back and mid back, for guys, especially in the trapezius muscles here, it tends to build up. Right. And there can be, severe headaches. I mean, the things that I read about blew me away because I wanted to divorce. And maybe it's just me, but I like things really neat and clean. And I wanted to divorce the idea of what burnout is emotionally from what it is physically. And I found that it's a spaghetti mess of unorganized stuff. There's the emotions, but there's also the physical side. And the physical side has so many fingers that stretches out into so many different things. And that was the old thing that surprised me. The new thing, if you want to know what I'm seeing in the research right now, and I didn't talk about it in the book because literally I've been paying attention to this since writing the book and working on newer burnout research, is burnout contagion. So we knew when I wrote the book, and I mentioned it in like one sentence, that burnout is contagious. Yes, we knew that. I don't think we knew how contagious it was. We're just now starting to find out that when you have one burned out person on a team or one burned out person in a family, that burnout is profoundly contagious and it spreads to others around them. And then burnout commiserates. So it's a vicious cycle. So my burnout inspires other people around me to be burnout, and then their burnout causes me to go deeper into burnout. And so it becomes a dynamic that self-feeds. And that is a whole new area that I'm interested in about how we can reduce burnout on teams and deal with the fact that this is a contagious thing, right? Attitudes are contagious, but burnout is incredibly contagious.
That makes sense. I mean, given the data showing very clearly how contagious emotions are and how contagious divorce is. I mean, that's crazy. But that burnout is
incredibly
contagious
crazy.
Too. Yeah. What about physical movement, moving our bodies, exercising to be able to deal with stress and burnout? Can you give us some advice on just the stress cycle and what your advice is around how we move in terms of how we manage our stress?
Well, God designed us to be more active than what most of us are in our
That's
culture,
true, yeah.
to be honest. And that's something I'm trying to deal with my own weight and trying to get back into the gym. But God designed us to move. The hypothesis is that movement helps my brain know that I'm alive and that I have agency and that I can do things in this world, right? And so there's a lot of positives there, as well as some hormonal positives and some neurochemical positives. But the thing that is really interesting to me, it's an older study now, but the findings have been replicated a few times. There was a study that compared people that were dealing with depression who were given antidepressants, SSRIs, typical antidepressant, first line treatment, or that did a regular exercise regimen. And here we're just talking about, I want to say, and I may misquote this, but I want to say they had to take a 45-minute walk 4 times a week, something like that. And then the other one was exercise and antidepressants. Well, the ones that did the best were on exercise and antidepressants. I want to say very quickly that I believe in SSRIs. I believe that there is a very legit place for antidepressant medication. So don't hear me say that that's not true. But what I will say is the people who did the exercise regimen actually did better in the trial than those who did antidepressants alone.
Wow.
And so if you think about that, exercise was very powerful. So those in that group was not taking antidepressants. They were just regularly exercising. They did better than the group that was just taking antidepressants. So exercise, very, very important. And not only that, I don't know if other people are like this. And I've never said this in an interview before, but because I'm trying to get healthy again in my daily routine, I find that if I take the time to be intentional about one thing in my physical health, there tends to be a chain. I'll tend to do the other things. But it is once I sort of let go of it all that nothing happens, right? So if I'm working out, and maybe this is just me, but if I'm working out, then I tend to pay attention more to what I'm eating because I feel like I'm working hard to take care of my body. So why would I want to not be paying attention to what I'm eating? And I tend to pay attention to how much water I'm drinking and not drinking soda and all those other things. And so, and this is something that's been talked about before in that wonderful book, The Power of Habit. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times just doing one thing, right? Taking care of myself in one way can mean so many things. But if you're going to start with one thing, my encouragement would be this: if you can, to your point, Allie, if you can, if you're physically able and your doctor thinks you're good to go, I would take a walk around your neighborhood 4 times a week. Start there. If you're a bodybuilder and you can lift the huge weights, good for you. But that's not the kind of thing that's going to necessarily help with your stress load. Getting that heart rate up into a reasonable range and moving and doing that on a regular basis, that's where you're going to see the big payoff. And not only that, but it gets us away from the beeping, buzzing, vibrating, status updating digital pacifiers that we all are so completely glued to when we're sitting in chairs, right? Watch it. I've started to watch this. Watch what happens when people sit down. Within a few minutes, right, the phone is out. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, when I get up and I walk, right, I may be listening to something, but I am finally engaging God's creation. And when I walk in my neighborhood, I'm seeing the trees and I'm hearing the birds. And that's something that God intended for us. But in our digital culture, I don't think we get as much of that as we need. So I think there are multiple benefits.
That's good. I have a stress app on my watch that measures like the stress that builds up in your body from sitting all day with the stress, with the restorative power of exercise. And it'll tell me toward the end of the day, like, you better move. Your stress is getting too high from sitting. And I'm like, darn it. Okay, I'm on.
My watch is telling me what to do.
I programmed it to do it, and I'm glad it does it, but I'm always annoyed when it does it.
Yes.
A last burnout specific question. What are some signs that we may be susceptible to burnout? Are there things that we need to keep an eye out for?
Well, symptoms of burnout, we know that reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that's right behind your eyebrows, is very prototypical of burnout. So things that part of my brain does for me, I'm not going to do as well. So I'm going to struggle with working memory. So I struggle on a regular basis with walking down a hall at the church and going, wait, what was I going down this for? But that might happen like once every 2 or 3 weeks. If it's happening every day, I know something is out of whack. Like, that working memory is just, in my book, I talk about it like a whiteboard. It's like God gave it to us so we could store information that we don't need to keep long term, right? But the problem is when I'm going through burnout, I store the information on the whiteboard, I turn around and I look back and it's gone, right? And so I may find myself telling people the same story multiple times, even though I should remember I already told them this. I may forget basic details that I would normally easily be able to recall. I may become rigid, right? So I'm not going to have creative thoughts very much. I'm definitely going to hold on to what works or what has worked in the past, even if I have good reason to believe it's not going to work in the future. I talked in the book about Henry Ford tearing apart a model of a new car that his staff built to show him what a new car could look like. And he was so angry that it wasn't the Model T that he tore it apart. That's cognitive rigidity, right? That's like, we're going to do it the way that it's always worked, even if I know it probably won't work in the future. That being emotionally erratic, and erratic isn't the right word. Let's say mercurial, being emotionally mercurial. So one moment I may be like unusually sad. The next moment I'm kind of floating around an unusually joyful mode. And then I may be cutting people a break when I shouldn't, and then snapping at people who aren't doing anything wrong, right?
Gotcha.
And that moment where I'm realizing my emotions aren't very calibrated, that's a good sign. Impulsiveness is a big one. If I realize that I'm not typically impulsive, but I'm making decisions on impulse, that is also a sign that reduced prefrontal cortex activity is happening. And then also, we all need to work on thinking before we do and thinking before we speak. And this is related to the impulsiveness I just said. We all need to work on that. But when you're burned out, it's way worse than we need to work on it. It's like we're losing control of this. Like the ability to think before I do something, or think before, it can really get to where I'm hurting people I love because I'm just not thinking. But if you think about it, the thinker is tired at this point. It's really, really exhausted. And so I don't have that much energy to give, right? And also when your loved ones, I would say your loved ones are a good mirror. And when they seem to, when either one of two things is either happening, either they're expressing a lot of concern and you find yourself continually going, why are they so concerned about me? That's probably a good time to kind of double check things. Or if you see them withdrawing from you, but they haven't typically been withdrawn, and it's almost like they're kind of numb toward you, right? Then I think that is a sign. But the biggest one, I think, is the things that you used to lean into stress wise. Like, I used to lean into this part of my job because I loved it. You're now leaning away from. So I used to really get into this, and now I'm kind of getting out of it, right? Well, there's a season to everything. If you were into fantasy football and eventually you get out of it, maybe it's just you don't like fantasy football anymore. But the difference would be things that brought me joy and things that were a big part of my passion that I used to just always want to move toward, I'm finding myself move away from. Yeah, that's a pretty big indicator that something is a little out of whack. Okay,
that's super, super helpful. Okay, let's move on to fun questions. There's not a good transition from painful burnout to fun questions, so we're just going to make the jump. First one, a song that you love.
A song that I love. So I just had brain surgery back in April.
Wow.
It was a very stressful time, and I was very anxious. I do struggle with an anxiety disorder myself. And so there's an old Kirk Franklin song called My Life Is in Your Hands. And Brooklyn Tab covered it some years ago. And I played that song a lot. It was part of my lament journey, lamenting not wanting to have the surgery and being very scared of it, but also trusting God that he would take care of me in it. And so that song meant an awful lot to me, and still does. It has a special place in my heart because it helped me get through in a difficult time.
Well, I'm so glad that you're recovered. Does it still, if you turn on that song now, does it does it just cause a ton of different emotions?
It does. It does. Because ultimately, I just did a message about this at NewSpring, and your listeners can find it in our Song for the Anxious Mind 2 series that we did. But I kind of shared my experience with a church about lament, and I had 2 chairs on the stage. I had a black chair and a white chair, and I talked about how lament is being comfortable with my ability to sit in that dark side and say, God, this stinks. I hate this. This is really, really difficult, and I don't want to go through this. And but then also to be able to go to the light side and sit in that chair and say, but God, I know you have my back, and I know you're going to be there for me, and I know I'm going to make it through this. Yeah, that song really brings up that journey for me of knowing that God was okay with me being in that dark place and saying, this is how it feels right now. Like that God wanted me to share my feelings with him. But also that God was informing those feelings and helping me to sit in that other chair, being able to say, but I know I'm going to be okay. I know God's going to get me through this. And so, yeah, that's kind of what that song brings up for me.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. What about a book that you've recommended other people read?
So I'm constantly nosing a book. So I was trying to think. I'm really into The Power of Habit lately. It's just a phenomenal book that is very, in my opinion, psychologically well researched.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you have somebody who writes from a journalistic perspective, they get a little loose with the psychology side of it. And that bugs me as somebody who is a research, that's what I teach in university is research methods and high level statistics. So I want to see research done well. And The Power of Habit is a book that is an example of someone doing it well, really being true to the research and talking about this very important part of our lives, right? Which is, in my book, I talk about habit and I talk about them like recipes. If you have a good recipe and you're making cookies, every time you make the recipe with a good recipe, you're going to make great cookies. On the other hand, if you have a bad recipe, as many cookies as you make, they're going to be bad cookies. And so the thing is, like, I need to be able to say, I want really good recipes. And if if things aren't turning out the way I want, I need to change the recipe. And I think that book is a phenomenal resource on
That's
that.
right. Charles Duhigg, right?
Yes.
Power of Habit.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep. Absolutely.
What about TV or movie?
Okay. So I don't watch a lot of TV, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, I was a little bit of a Frasier buff.
Oh, yeah.
And so I have enjoyed watching a few of the episodes of the remake of Frasier that came out, last year?
I didn't even know there was a remake of Frasier.
Yeah, they rebooted it. No, Kelsey Grammer is in it, and a guest appearance by Perry Gilpin at the end. But it's mostly a new cast, but I thought they were very funny. And, Frasier was a little raunchy every once in a while. I was glad to see, because I was worried that updating it this many years hence, I was going to watch an episode and just go, oh, I just don't, But I was really pleased to see they were leaning into good comedy, and I enjoyed it. So
it's great. It is amazing in the 80s and 90s, especially the stuff we watched and didn't realize. That's
where our culture's headed. Yes. Yes.
Well, we watched some 80s movie in our house, and one of my sons was like, I think political correctness has a benefit because people were terrible to each other back in the 80s. It's like, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, it is funny though. I had a professor in my early days of psychology who said that media is a good predictor of where the culture will be in 15 years. It's always haunted me to hear that ever since then, because it seems like it holds pretty true.
Yeah, it really does. Okay. Last question. What about a product that you've told a friend they need to have?
Okay, so let me tell you how far back, like behind the times I am. I just got an AirTag for the first time ever, right? Because I bought a vehicle and wanted to make sure I didn't lose my keys. It's happened before. And I bought an AirTag, and I'm just so fascinated with this little thing. This is amazing. Like, I can track my keys wherever they are. So I've been telling everybody around me, these things are awesome. And they're like, yeah, they've been around forever.
Well, just wait until an airline loses your luggage, and then you can see it sitting in some random driveway overnight. And then you panic that it's not going to come back to you tomorrow because you're like, listen, it's at blah, blah, blah address.
Somebody's house. Yeah.
It is literally at someone, because this must be what they do. They must put it in a van of some third party company, and it sits in the driveway of someone's house, and then you'll get it in the morning. But I do know airlines really hate AirTags, because now we know where our luggage is.
Now we know where it's at.
It's not at the airport. It's at some dude's house.
My daughter at the university that she just at Regent, she was concerned because she's like, well, we bought her a bike. She has a car, but we bought her a bike so she could go back and forth really close to classes. And she was like, but there's no bike rack really close to my dorm room where I can lock it up. I'm like, just stick an air tag on that puppy. I'm like, wherever it goes, you'll know where it's at, So that tells you how fascinated I'm so behind the times. But yeah, so it doesn't take much to fascinate me. I think that's amazing.
I love it. And I'm sure she just says dad's in his air tag era. And that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm catching up.
This is great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah. So the book itself, if you go to stressfracturebook.com, you can read the first chapter of the book and it gives you places where you can get it. And then you can look me up at Regent University. My profile is there, and happy always to talk to any of your listeners that are interested in graduate work and they want to talk about our Graduate School of Psychology. Always thrilled to answer any questions I can. And then my first love, of course, is NewSpring Church. You can find me there at newspring.org. And if you look at newspring.org/sermons, we have all the messages by my dad and myself and others. So that's all archived there, and you can find that there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
It's been a joy. Thank you.
That was so helpful and so interesting, right? Of course, I'm giving away copies of his book. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure you're subscribed, like it, and leave a comment. If you're listening, take a screenshot, put it on a Facebook story, put it on an Instagram story, tag me, and you'll be entered to win a copy of his book. And thank you for being here. I am so impressed with the way that you show up for you, that you make sure that you're learning something every week that's going to help you live the life that God has for you, that's going to help protect you from burnout. And if you're feeling a little burnout, a little crispy, it's going to help you recover. These are strategies that are going to help you today, tomorrow, and forever and ever. Amen. I believe in what's inside of you. I believe in your dreams, and I know you're making an impact on this world for good. That's why you're here. Just little things, little tiny steps. That's all we have to do. 1% better all the time. We don't have to completely remake our lives. We don't have to stress ourselves out. That is not what we want. We want to get information that is easy to use. We want tools that are easy to use. We can pick them up and carry them with us so we can continue to live the life that God has for us, because God has created you to stand strong and bring something special and unique to this world that only you can bring. I love that I get to coach you and equip you every week. So keep stepping up, keep showing up, keep loving well, because you know the truth. You can't break a woman who gets her strength from God. I hope you have a great day, and I'll be back with you soon. I just felt food on my lip. Sorry. Let me make sure I know the name of the series. Hold on. Looking in the right place. Okay, let's do this thing. I felt like I was off, but it's the best I can do. Okay, and cut.